I felt my daughter-in-law was hiding something strange, so I pretended I had to stay on guard tonight. I left halfway, but then I quietly returned to watch my own house. As I stared at the back door, I jumped when a man put his hand on my shoulder. His voice was hoarse. "Wait until 1 a.m. You'll see everything." With that, he vanished into the mist as if he'd never been there. Right at 1, the backyard light came on. My heart sank when I saw my daughter-in-law dragging a very heavy sack toward the car. And suddenly the sack moved a little. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to know how far our revenge stories reach. The darkness of Phoenix swallowed the streetlights as I parked my old sedan 2 blocks from home. Before leaving, I had told my son, David, and my daughter-in-law, Isabella, that the hospital needed me for an emergency night shift. I drove for a bit, but didn't get far. I couldn't get David's haggard, tired face out of my head lately, nor forget the strange scent of incense constantly floating in their bedroom. Something wasn't right. I knew it. I walked back, sneaking through a paved alley. I chose a perfect spot, hidden behind a bougainvillea bush in front of the house. From there, I could clearly see the front door and part of the concrete backyard of the house, the home I had helped build my entire life. Inside, the living room light was already off. The whole house was plunged into silence, save for a faint flicker of light seeping from David and Isabella's second-floor bedroom window. Suddenly, a bony, icy hand rested on my shoulder. I was about to scream, but my veteran nurse's instinct made me cover my mouth in time. I spun around, my heart wanting to pound out of my chest. In front of me, an old man, the darkness and fog hiding almost all of his face, revealing only features weathered by years and suffering. In the dim light of the street lamp, only his sunken eyes were visible, but they shone with a strange light. "You," I tried to ask, but my voice caught in my throat. The old man brought a bony finger to his lips, asking for silence. His voice was hoarse, a whisper that slid like wind through cracks. "Don't say anything. Wait until 1, then you'll see everything." I didn't get to process what he was saying when he stepped back, vanished into the fog, and disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. I rubbed my eyes, looking at the empty space where he had been. A hallucination? Maybe stress was playing tricks on me, but the icy cold I still felt on my shoulder was undeniable proof. I looked at my watch. It was 11:30. I had an hour and a half to wait in complete bewilderment. Time passed slowly and heavily. Every minute felt like a century. I sat on the ground with my back against the cold wall, never taking my eyes off the house. At that moment, my watch vibrated softly. It was exactly 1 o'clock, as if an invisible command had activated it. The backyard floodlight flashed on. My heart constricted. The back door opened with an eerie creak that broke the absolute silence. Isabella emerged. She wore a tight-fitting black outfit from head to toe, her hair neatly pulled back. Her face, under the white light, looked waxy and emotionless. She carefully scanned her surroundings, checking every corner of the patio. Assured no one was there, she went back inside. A few seconds later, she dragged out a huge burlap sack. The sack's scrape against the concrete produced a grating, macabre sound that lodged in my mind. From her struggle, I knew the bundle was heavy. But the worst wasn't that. Inside the sack, something moved. It kept twitching, sometimes with violent jerks, other times scraping desperately at the sides. "David!" The thought shot through me like lightning. My whole body began to tremble, my legs giving out. I felt drained of strength. With superhuman effort, I pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up with a photo of David smiling on his wedding day, that warm, kind smile of his. Trembling, I dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then it went straight to voicemail. Isabella opened her car's trunk, used all her strength to lift the sack. A dull thud echoed as it fell inside. She didn't hesitate for a second. She slammed the trunk shut, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The red taillights, like 2 lines of blood, flickered and then slowly drove out the gate, disappearing into the night's fog. As soon as the car vanished, I ran across the street like a madwoman. I fumbled under the decorative cactus pot and pulled out the spare key, my hands trembling so much I almost dropped it. I opened the door. A blast of icy air and a strong, thick incense smell hit me square in the face, almost taking my breath away. The house was completely silent, a silence more terrifying than any sound. "David! David! Where are you?" I ran up the stairs, whispering his name urgently, not daring to raise my voice for fear of the echo of my own tone. I pushed open the door to their bedroom. Isabella's side was messy, but David's sheet was still stretched, taut, cold, as if no one had slept there that night. My eyes, filled with panic, darted to the nightstand. David's wallet, phone, and keys were still there. My son couldn't have left on his own without those things. I felt an invisible hand squeezing my chest, everything blurred. A mother's worst nightmare had come true. My son was gone. Amidst the panic, memories flooded in, sharp and painful, like a slow-motion film of how my family's paradise transformed into hell. I'm Eleanor Thompson, 60 years old, and my life is defined by two key moments. The first was when my husband, Richard, died of a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone with a grief I couldn't name. The second, which became the engine of my life ever since, was David. My son is my whole world. He's a construction supervisor, a kind, calm young man with his father's warm smile and my deep eyes. Watching him grow, become a successful man, made me feel like I couldn't ask for anything more. As head nurse in the emergency room at St. Raphael Hospital, I've seen too many losses, and my only prayer was that David would always be well. Until 3 years ago, David brought Isabella home for the first time. She was an art teacher, with large eyes full of distant sadness and a soft smile that could melt even the hardest heart. She won me over from the first moment. I silently thanked God and Richard in heaven for giving my son a wife who seemed so perfect. Those days were the happiest of my life. I still remember Sunday dinners, David grilling in the backyard, the smell of roasted meat mixed with smoke filling the entire garden. Isabella sitting on the swing with her sketchbook in hand, looking up occasionally to see her husband with an expression full of tenderness and pride. Their laughter, their lively conversations filled the void Richard had left. I thought my family was finally complete again, but that happiness was fragile. Everything started to change about 6 months ago, like a poisonous vine slowly creeping into my home, suffocating everything. At first, they were small things. I noticed Isabella getting up at midnight. Once, I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and saw her standing in front of the large mirror in the living room. Under the dim moonlight, she looked like a shadow, muttering something to herself in a strange, guttural, dry language that didn't resemble any tongue I had ever heard. I called her softly, "Isabella?" and she started, turning with a somewhat forced smile. "I can't sleep, Mom." Then their bedroom started to smell strongly of incense. But it wasn't a pleasant aroma like those used in spas, but a pungent, harsh one, like burnt herbs, that permeated the curtains, the sheets, and made it difficult for me to breathe every time I entered. One afternoon, while cleaning their room, I accidentally dropped Isabella's sketchbook. It opened to a page full of strange and disturbing symbols. I still clearly remember a hand with an eye right in the center of the palm, surrounded by concentric circles and twisted characters like small snakes. When I cautiously asked her about it, Isabella just smiled politely. Her smile was still soft, but her eyes weren't. "Oh, they're just symbols for meditation, Mom, to help me calm down. Don't worry." Her "don't worry" was what truly started to worry me, especially when David's health began to deteriorate strangely. The first time was during dinner. We were all enjoying the meal when suddenly David dropped his fork on the table with a dry clatter. His eyes widened excessively, fixed on an empty spot, and then he fainted. Just a few seconds later, he came to, pale, drenched in sweat. He forced a smile and said he had just felt dizzy from overwork. Then he started complaining of persistent headaches, constant fatigue, feeling exhausted all the time. My son, who used to be so active and full of life, slowly faded. I insisted on taking him to the hospital for a checkup, but Isabella always gently dismissed it. "He's just stressed, Mom. I've already made him some herbal tea. Don't worry." Her dark brown herbal tea became something inseparable from David every night. And then came that fateful night, the night all my suspicions were cruelly confirmed. I brought him a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, his favorite. Isabella was in the kitchen at the time. When David brought the glass to his lips, my nurse-trained sense of smell stopped me cold. Amidst the fresh juice aroma, I perceived a very faint, sweet chemical odor, an odor I knew all too well. characteristic of a mild sedative of the type we used with patients in the ER. My heart felt like it stopped. Just then, Isabella came out of the kitchen with another cup of the familiar dark brown liquid in her hands. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and gently took the glass of juice from David, saying, "It's better you drink my tea, David. Juice has acid. It's not good for your headache." Her gaze at me at that moment was no longer kind. It was cold, sharp, and laden with warning. For a fleeting instant, I saw another person in her eyes, a stranger, possessing my daughter-in-law's body. It wasn't just care, it was control. She was hiding something. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stand by. I couldn't keep believing her sweet lies or those suspicious cups of tea. I had to find out what she was doing to my son, and that's why tonight I lied about a hospital shift. That's why I hid among the cold bougainvillea, only to witness a scene more terrifying than any mother could imagine. All the signs, all the loose pieces of the past few months, now fit together into a gruesome portrait, a truth I didn't know if I had the courage to face. Stumbling, I went down to the kitchen looking for a sign. Any sign. On the table, David's dinner tray was still intact, cold and dry. He hadn't eaten. Beside it, an empty herbal teacup. I stared at the cup, the layer of dark brown residue at the bottom. That was poison. That was the devil's tool. That was what left my son defenseless, unable to resist, turning him into something that could easily be put in a sack. Rage and fear swirled within me, giving me a savage energy. I had to call the police. I ran out to the car. I drove like a madwoman to the nearest police station. The neon light of the place was harsh, cold, hurting my eyes. I told the story to a duty officer, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles under his eyes and a long, bored yawn. "My son David has disappeared." My voice trembled, words catching in my throat. My daughter-in-law Isabella put him in a sack and took him somewhere. The sack was moving. I saw it. He could be in danger. The policeman looked at me as if I had just escaped from a mental asylum. He typed a few words on the computer and said with disinterest, "Mrs. Thompson, calm down. We can't open a missing persons report until 24 hours have passed. Your son is an adult. He probably argued with his wife and went to clear his head for a while. I'm sure he'll be back tomorrow morning." "No, not almost," I yelled, slamming my hand on the table. "You don't understand. He didn't leave on his own. Isabella forced him." I saw it with my own eyes. I tried to explain the urgency of the situation again, describing every gruesome detail. Isabella's black clothes, the dull thud when she threw the sack into the trunk. But my desperate words collided with a wall of indifference. He just shook his head, his expression visibly annoyed. "Go home. If he doesn't show up in 24 hours, come back and fill out this form." He pushed a sheet towards me, that weapon of the bureaucratic apparatus, as cold and insensitive as he was. I left the police station dejectedly. A feeling of helplessness and despair enveloped me. No one believed me. In their eyes, I was just a hysterical old woman with a vivid imagination. I was completely alone in this fight. As soon as I reached the beginning of my street, my heart stopped. A bright beam of light crossed the windshield. Isabella's car headlights. She was coming back. Scared, I hit the brake, turned off the engine, turned off the lights, and slid down into the seat, not breathing. Isabella's car passed mine, turned into the driveway, and stopped in the yard. Through the crack in the window, I saw her get out of the car. She seemed neither hurried nor worried. She calmly locked the car, entered the house, and closed the door as if returning from a simple night walk. I stayed there, motionless in the darkness, cold sweat running down my back. I couldn't go home right then. What would I say to her? How would I face her if the image of her dragging my son in a sack was still in my mind? The lie about the night shift at the hospital, which at first was just an excuse, became my only lifeline. I started the car again and, trembling, drove straight to Street Raphael Hospital. The staff break room was now my only refuge. The air smelled strongly of disinfectant, that scent of life and order, but it failed to calm me. I made a cup of coffee, but couldn't drink it. My hands trembled so much I spilled coffee all over the table. I couldn't sleep a wink that night. In my mind, the image of the moving sack repeated over and over like an endless horror movie. The sounds of the sack scraping the floor, the faint scratches I imagined, echoed in my ears, and above all, Isabella's terrifyingly serene face as she committed that atrocious act. The face of a demon. At dawn, after a night of mental torture, I drove back home. I was ready. I was going to confront Isabella. I was going to interrogate her. I was going to force her to give me back my son. I used my key. I opened the door carefully. The house was silent, but as I entered the living room, I froze. David was sitting at the dining table. There he was, in flesh and blood, with a cup of coffee in his hand. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. He looked a bit disheveled, with a grown beard, but it was him, my son, and he was breathing. He looked up and stared at me with a little surprise on his face. "Mom, are you back from your night shift already?" "David!" I ran to hug him. Tears immediately streamed down my face. I held him tightly, feeling his warmth, his presence. He smelled strongly of alcohol and cigarettes. He patted my back softly, with a somewhat apologetic tone. "Last night I went out for drinks with some old friends. We had such a good time that I lost track of time, and my cell phone battery died. That's why I couldn't answer you. Sorry for making you worry." His explanation made terrifying sense. Every detail matched. But what about the moving sack? Just then, Isabella came out of the room. She was wearing cream-colored silk pajamas, her hair loose over her shoulders. She smiled sweetly and approached to take David's arm. "You had Mom and me worried." I let out a long sigh, as if I had just woken from a terrible nightmare. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe worry was making me imagine things. But when I looked up and met Isabella's eyes, all that sense of relief vanished. In that seemingly tender gaze, I saw an icy glint, a spark of triumph that immediately extinguished. The following weeks, our house became a suffocating stage. The air grew thick with falsehood and unnamed fear. We still had dinners together, still had the usual chats, but behind every smile, behind every kind word from Isabella, I felt an icy abyss. I lived in a state of total alert. Every sound, every movement she made, I analyzed with a magnifying glass of distrust. Meanwhile, David was fading. He was visibly thinner. His skin, once tanned and healthy, like a good construction engineer, now looked pale, with an unhealthy gray tone. The dark circles under his eyes grew deeper, turning his gaze into two empty wells. He had lost his spark, his sense of humor. He always seemed absent, as if his soul was wandering in a place I couldn't reach. His brief fainting spells became more and more frequent. Once, while telling a joke from work, he suddenly fell silent. The fork dropped from his hand, and his gaze became empty. A few seconds later, he blinked confusedly, looking around, not understanding what had happened, drenched in sweat. Isabella was always there immediately, stroking his back with a voice full of false concern. "Again, you're overdoing it with work, love. You need to rest." I couldn't take it anymore. I used my prestige at the hospital to take David to see Dr. Miller, an internal medicine colleague I trusted. I asked him to run every possible test: complete blood work, brain CT scan, electrocardiogram. I had hope. I prayed that science would give me an answer, a concrete illness I could confront. But the results were a dead end. All of David's indicators were completely normal. Dr. Miller patted my shoulder with an uncomfortable look and concluded, "Eleanor," I checked everything very carefully. "Maybe the boy is just very stressed from work. He needs to rest and relax." Science, with all its modern technology, surrendered. I returned home with more fear and frustration than before. I knew it wasn't stress. It was something darker, something that was devouring my son's life before my eyes. Isabella acted stranger and stranger, as if she no longer cared to hide it. Every night she stayed up late in the living room. She said she needed quiet to prepare her classes, but I knew it was a lie. One night, almost at midnight, a constant, hypnotic murmur woke me. It wasn't coming from their room, but from the downstairs living room. The whisper sounded like a strange cult chant, repeating a monotonous, disturbing melody. Driven by curiosity and fear, I silently left my room, walking as slowly as possible on the wooden floor. I cracked open the door and looked into the living room. Under the dim moonlight filtering through the window, I saw a chilling scene. Isabella had spread a large black cloth on the floor. Sitting right in the center, motionless, with his eyes closed and his back straight like a statue, was David. Around him, 7 lit white candles placed on small silver objects that looked like saucers. Isabella was kneeling in front of him, hands clasped, murmuring words I couldn't understand. From time to time, she moved one of those objects, making a dry, metallic sound that chilled my blood. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I slammed the door shut, leaning against the wall, unable to breathe. What was that? A ritual? An exorcism? Or something even worse? The next night, I was prepared. I told them I had a headache from the weather and would go to bed early. I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I gripped my cell phone in my hand, my heart beating like a drum. When I heard the whispers again, I acted. I activated the camera. I cracked open the door just enough for the lens to pass through. What I saw on the screen was even more horrible than the night before. David was still like a soulless doll. Isabella, after praying, took out a sharp object that gleamed in the candlelight. She looked at it with eerie devotion and, without hesitation, cut her fingertip. A thick, dark drop of blood fell. Slowly, she brought the bleeding finger to David's forehead and let the drop fall between his eyebrows. That blood on his pale skin was a gruesome mark. I heard it clearer this time. Lord, accept my offering, take this life, and grant me immortality. That phrase shattered me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run and snatch my son from there, but fear paralyzed me. What if I did something and she harmed him? What had she given him to leave him like that? A single movement could put him at risk. I could only stand there trembling, recording. I had to document that madness. I felt helplessness devour me, turning me into a cowardly spectator of my son's suffering. That video was the only evidence, and also the heaviest burden. When the clock struck almost 1, Isabella blew out each candle. Darkness covered everything. Then, with chilling calm, she cleaned everything up. She used a white cloth to wipe the blood from David's forehead. She folded the black cloth. She collected the silver saucers and candles in a thick cloth bag, exactly like the one I saw that foggy night. I kept recording, trembling silently. When she finished, she helped him up, my son, still in a somnolent, unconscious state, walking like a manipulated sleepwalker. I watched her guide David to the bedroom, lay him in bed, and cover him with a blanket in a gesture of care so false it churned my stomach. Once she made sure David was still, Isabella left the room, and I heard a click. She had locked the living room door from the inside, leaving me trapped on the hallway side. My heart pounded. What was she planning to do now? Isabella went to the back door. I held my breath, pointing my phone in her direction. I saw her crack open the door, peeking into the darkness of the garden. Then she crouched in a corner I had never noticed during the day. She pulled out a small cage. Inside was a white cat, so white it seemed to glow in the night. Perhaps it was a stray cat she had managed to catch. She opened the cage. The cat, scared, retreated to the corner, meowing faintly. Without a trace of compassion, Isabella roughly grabbed it. The cat writhed. Its small claws scratched her hand, letting out sharp cries as if begging for mercy. Isabella didn't flinch. She put the cat inside the sack along with other ritual objects. The meow was instantly muffled. Only the desperate, frantic sounds of its nails scratching from within remained. A peace broke in my mind. A truth as repulsive as it was liberating hit me. The sound I heard that night in the sack, that movement, those scratches I swore were David's, were actually those of a helpless animal like that. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt overwhelming relief, a demented gratitude that my son was safe, that it hadn't been him in that sack. But immediately after, nausea rose in my throat. I was disgusted by Isabella's cruelty and coldness. Not only was she mentally destroying my son, but she was also capable of sacrificing innocent lives for her sick ritual. For several days I lived like a ghost. The video on my cell phone became a digital monster that haunted my dreams. I watched it dozens of times, discovering a new, disturbing detail in each repetition. I knew I couldn't act alone. The previous time at the police station had been a disaster. They would never believe such an absurd story without more evidence, or without someone who could confirm it. I needed more information. I needed someone who could understand this madness. That afternoon, after my shift at the hospital, I felt exhausted. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to face Isabella's fake smile or David's empty gaze. I sat on a stone bench in the hospital garden, from where I could see the noisy main avenue. I needed some fresh air, something from the real world to pull me out of the dark swamp that was my house. I was lost in thought when a figure silently sat beside me. A smell of cheap, harsh cigarette smoke filled me. an aroma so familiar it scared me. I looked up, and my heart stopped for a second. It was the mysterious old man from the foggy night. In daylight, his appearance was even more worn. His tangled white hair, his sunken eyes like empty wells, and the wrinkles on his face were not marks of age, but scars of eternal pain. He didn't look at me, just observed the flow of cars, and with a hoarse voice, as if each word fell into the void between us, he said, "You saw it, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I nodded silently, my throat closed, unable to utter a word. And now, where do I begin? Do I talk about the drop of blood or the cat? The old man took a deep drag from his cigarette and exhaled a cloud of white smoke that for an instant obscured his pain-filled face. "I know you have many questions. My name is Marcus. Marcus." I repeated that name as if it were a spell. Finally, the ghost of the night had a name. I gathered all my courage, looked him directly in the eyes, and with a trembling voice asked, "Why did you warn me? How did you know all this?" Marcus turned to look at me. This time, his gaze was no longer enigmatic, but filled with an infinite weariness and pain. A pain I could feel deep in my soul. "Because I was exactly in your place," he said in a grave voice. "I saw how the demon devoured the person I loved most right before my eyes." He crushed the cigarette against the sole of his old shoe and began to tell his story. "It's an organization," Marcus began in a monotone voice, but laden with hatred hardened by the years. "They call themselves the White Hand. On the outside, they seem like a spiritual support group, a modern religious community that welcomes everyone. But in reality, they are a cult, a vulture that feeds on decomposing souls." He said they focused on mentally vulnerable people, desperate for a loss or burdened with guilt. They approached them gently, using sweet words about forgiveness and salvation, and little by little implanted a toxic doctrine, a sick and distorted vision of love and sacrifice. They preach that earthly love, family affection, romantic love, all are chains that bind the soul and prevent it from reaching purity. To achieve redemption, to become a saint, a person must demonstrate absolute devotion, surrendering what they value most, the person they love most, to what they call the supreme light. My heart felt like it stopped. "The person you love most, David. And that surrender," Marcus continued, his voice breaking, "is not something that happens overnight. It's a process, a series of rituals designed to gradually drain the vital energy, the will, and the soul of the sacrifice, until it becomes an empty, obedient shell, ready to accept its destiny before the final ritual." Then he told me about his only daughter, Sarah. His wife had died young, and father and daughter had each other to survive. Sarah was an intelligent girl, a talented artist, but with an overly sensitive soul and a constant sense of loneliness. After a romantic disappointment, Sarah broke down and began attending the White Hand meetings. At first, Marcus was happy. He saw her more animated. She had made new friends. But then Sarah changed. She began to say strange things about soul purification and sacred sacrifice to wash away the sins of the world. She started burning a type of pungent incense that he couldn't stand. And one night, Marcus said, his voice choked, his sunken eyes fixed on a distant, painful past. She woke me up. She told me I had to sit in a chair in the middle of the living room, that it was the ritual to release earthly bonds for the Lord. Then she brought a caged cat, saying that the pure soul of the animal would absorb my impurities. My whole body froze. The white cat, the sack. After each ritual, exactly at 1 a.m., she would take the sack with the cat's corpse and the ritual objects somewhere. I loved her so much, and I was also afraid of her. I didn't dare stop her. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that she would soon realize the madness she was caught up in. He was silent for a long time. Remorse was etched into every wrinkle on his face, until one day, Sarah didn't come back. A few days later, someone left a letter under the door. There was no explanation or farewell, just a line printed in cold letters. "Sarah has fulfilled her mission. She has become a saint." I put my hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. Sanctification. They killed her and called it redemption. Marcus tried to alert the police, but his story was too absurd. No evidence, no body. They thought his adult daughter had left voluntarily with some cult. They left him alone with the pain and remorse of knowing his silence was complicit in evil. But he didn't give up. he started investigating on his own. He delved everywhere looking for information about covert cults operating in the city. And then he recognized their symbol, the same one Sarah had scribbled in her notebook. A white hand extended with an eye in the center of the palm. The white hand with the eye. The image from Isabella's notebook appeared clearly in my mind. "A month ago," Marcus concluded, pulling me out of my terrifying thoughts, "I was working the night shift at a bakery. At dawn, I passed through your neighborhood and saw your daughter-in-law. She was dragging a sack out of the house. It was still dark, but under the streetlight, I managed to see a small embroidered logo in a corner of the sack. It was the image of the white hand with the eye. The horrible memories of his daughter returned with force. He knew immediately what was happening. Another family was falling into the same trap he couldn't escape. That's why he returned that foggy night. To warn me." As I listened to Marcus's story, all the loose pieces in my mind fit together, forming a complete and horrifying picture. The symbols in Isabella's notebook, the smell of incense, David's increasingly evident deterioration, and the cat inside the sack. It was all part of a macabre plan. The fear within me transformed into fury and determination. I would not allow David to become another case like Sarah's. I would not stay silent. I looked at Marcus directly in the eyes, my voice firm, without a trace of tremor. "I have proof. It's not an absurd story. I recorded everything while she performed the ritual." I showed him the video on my cell phone. Marcus stared at it, his hands clenched, knuckles white. He saw David motionless, saw Isabella cut her hand. He saw a drop of blood fall onto my son's forehead. I saw a tear roll down his sunken cheek. When the video ended, he looked up. In his sunken eyes, for the first time, I saw a faint ray of hope. He spoke urgently. "We have to go to the police, but not the regular police. I know someone. She will believe us." "Who?" I asked immediately. Marcus looked into my eyes. "Your best friend, Detective Miller." The name Detective Miller, which Marcus uttered, was like a lifeline thrown in the middle of a storm. Detective Miller was not only my best friend since high school, but also a brilliant and honest police inspector. I hadn't thought of going to her from the beginning, for fear my story would sound too crazy, and for fear of bothering her with her already stressful job. But now, with Marcus's testimony, I knew I had hope. "How do you know Detective Miller?" I asked, still surprised. Marcus explained that he didn't know her through me. Years ago, while he was desperately searching for his daughter, Detective Miller investigated a disappearance case related to cults. Although that case was also closed due to lack of evidence, she was one of the few people who genuinely listened and believed the affected families. She didn't dismiss them as crazy. Without further thought, I pulled out my cell phone. I called Detective Miller immediately. Her voice, warm and firm as always, answered instantly. I contained my desperation and spoke with as much urgency as I could. "Miller, it's me. It's something very serious. It's about David's life. I need to see you now." Detective Miller was silent for a few seconds. She knew me too well. She sensed the gravity in my voice. "All right, Eleanor. In half an hour at the Dove coffee shop, on the outskirts. That place is discreet." In the small coffee shop hidden in an alley, Marcus and I sat across from Detective Miller. I told her the whole story. From the first signs, the night in the fog, to the blood ritual I managed to record. I showed her the video. Marcus, silently beside me, recounted Sarah's tragedy and placed on the table a photo of a young woman with sad eyes, identical to her father's. Detective Miller watched the video, her face hardening. She didn't interrupt us, just listened attentively. Her sharp investigator's eyes didn't miss a single detail. From time to time, she jotted down lines in a small notebook. The air in the coffee shop seemed to thicken. When we finished, Detective Miller exhaled a long breath. She had no doubts. She looked at us with empathy and determination. "Eleanor, Marcus, thank you. This is much more serious than I thought." She explained that she was currently part of a special unit dedicated to investigating organized crime and covert cults. "The White Hand," she said, "is a name we've heard in rumors, in unexplained disappearances, but we've never had enough evidence to act. That video of yours, Eleanor, is the missing link." She immediately pulled out her cell phone and made a call. Her tone became entirely professional, brief, and firm. "I have the living link. Prepare the meeting." She turned to me and asked me to copy the video to a secure USB drive she handed me. Then she put her hand on mine. looked at me intently, and said in a serious voice, "Eleanor, from this moment on, you have to act as if nothing happened when you go home. Stay absolutely calm. David's safety now depends completely on your ability to pretend." The following days were the most tense of my life. I cared for David while pretending to be cheerful in front of the angel-faced demon. Then, Detective Miller called me and summoned me to a secret location, an unmarked office in an old building. Inside, a special unit was working at full speed. Based on my testimony, the video, and Marcus's information, they began to review old files, cases that had been gathering dust for years. A young investigator named Marco brought me a yellowed file. "Mrs. Thompson, do you know the name Lisa Rodriguez?" I froze. My throat went dry. That was the name of Isabella's college roommate she had mentioned. The friend who, according to her, had died tragically in a gas leak. I remembered Isabella crying inconsolably when she told me that, saying she would regret forever not having been with her that night. The file indicated that Lisa died in a locked bedroom. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The initial police conclusion was a gas leak accident. However, the forensic report mentioned a strange detail that was overlooked at the time. Marco pointed to an underlined line. There was a strong smell of incense in the air, and on the wall behind Lisa's bed, there was a faint drawing made with white chalk, a hand with an eye in the center. At the time, the police thought it was just strange student decor. Isabella, as a roommate and the last person to see Lisa, was interrogated, but she played her part perfectly. She showed grief, her statement was consistent, and she had no apparent motive. The case was closed. Detective Miller placed a hand on my shoulder. "Now everything is clear. Isabella is not a victim, but a key member, a long-time predator of this cult. Perhaps offering Lisa was her test, the initiation rite to ascend within the organization." Isabella's perfect facade had collapsed. My daughter-in-law was not just a fanatic, she was a murderer. The investigation team met to draw up a plan. They already had enough basis to arrest her immediately, but Detective Miller shook her head. "Arresting her now would be too easy," she explained. "She'll keep quiet. Her lawyer will step in, and the leaders will have time to erase all evidence. We don't just want Isabella. We want to dismantle the entire White Hand nest." A plan was devised. They wanted to catch her in the act of performing a ritual. We need irrefutable proof to indict the entire organization behind it. If we catch her in the moment, in that fanatical mental state, she won't be able to deny anything. That will be our chance to extract more information. That plan placed me at the center of the danger. They would secretly install microphones and tiny cameras in my living room, and I would be the internal link, the one who would give the signal when the ritual began. Returning home that day, I felt like an actress stepping onto a deadly stage. Every gesture, every word had to be perfectly measured. The next day, as planned, taking advantage of Isabella going out to teach classes, a team of technicians disguised as electricians arrived at my house. They didn't speak much. They worked in silence with a chilling professionalism. Tiny cameras were hidden behind books in plant pots. A microphone was placed under the table. They worked at full speed, and when they left, my house was already a laid trap. Before leaving, one of the team handed me a small device the size of a thumb, a miniature walkie-talkie, and showed me how to hide it in my coat pocket. Detective Miller called me to give me clear instructions, her voice serious and firm. She was no longer my best friend. She was a commander. "Eleanor, when Isabella starts lighting the candles, that's the moment. You just have to press and hold this button for 1 second. We'll be right outside. Don't do anything else. Stay in your room. Understood?" "Understood," I replied, my throat dry. That night, I painfully tried to act normally. I cooked dinner, David's favorite dishes, but I couldn't taste anything. I asked him about his work, trying to force a meaningless conversation. Isabella was as sweet as ever. She even said my stew was tastier than usual. But in her eyes, I saw a terrifying emptiness, an extreme concentration on a goal I already knew too well. Dinner passed in a tense silence, like a stretched rope. David ate very little, his gaze lost, like a sleepwalker repeating routines. Isabella occasionally served him more food in a gesture of care so false it churned my stomach. I had to restrain myself with all my might not to throw the plate in her face. After dinner, the same scene as always. Isabella prepared David a cup of herbal tea. "Drink it, love. "It'll help you sleep better," she said in a voice sweet as honey. David drank it obediently. Shortly after, he began to yawn. His eyes closed. He said he wanted to rest. Isabella took him to their bedroom. I also pretended to be tired and retired to my room, my heart pounding like a drum. I closed the door and leaned against the cold wood. I sat on the bed, my hand clutching the walkie-talkie in my coat pocket. Time stood still. Every second was torture. Around midnight, I heard it, that familiar sound in the living room, the rustle of the black cloth unfolding, then the dry, metallic clink of silver objects being placed on the floor. A while later, I heard their bedroom door open. Isabella helped David, who was already completely unconscious, out to the living room and sat him right in the center of the cloth. Then I heard the sound of a match striking. A flickering light seeped through the crack in the door. The click of a lit candle marked the beginning of the demonic ritual. That was the signal. My hands trembled. I reached into my pocket. My thumb sought the small button. I took a deep breath, pressed, and held the communicator button for 1 second. Almost immediately, a deafening crash resonated. The front door was battered down. The special team, dressed in black and armed, entered from all directions like a dark avalanche. "Police! Nobody move!" Isabella startled and spun around. She held a small, sharp knife, about to cut her finger. Her gaze was no longer empty. It was pure delirium. Seeing the police, David remained seated, unconscious, unaware of anything. Isabella screamed, a savage, inhuman shriek. "Get away, you wretched worms! Don't stop me! He is about to be saved. He is about to transcend." She didn't let go of the knife. In a final act of madness, she turned her body and raised the knife toward David's neck. "No!" I screamed from the room, but Detective Miller was faster. She lunged like a panther and with a precise move threw Isabella to the floor. The knife flew out of her hand and skittered across the ceramic floor. The paramedics who came with the special team rushed in. They didn't care about Isabella. Their objective was David. They checked his pulse, his pupils, and immediately put him on a stretcher. I rushed out of the room, catching a glimpse of my son's waxy pale face as they carried him out to the ambulance. "David, my son!" I cried desperately. The police handcuffed Isabella. She continued to scream, insult, and struggle like a wounded beast. "You ruined everything! The light will punish all of you!" At the police station, under the cold fluorescent lights, Isabella initially said nothing. She sat motionless in the chair, hands cuffed, her gaze lost on the white wall. The mask of fanaticism had fallen. Only an empty shell remained. Detective Miller entered the interrogation room without a word, placed the laptop on the table, turned the screen towards Isabella, and pressed play. The video I had recorded appeared. On the screen, Isabella was seen cutting her hand, letting drops of blood fall onto David's forehead, while whispering sick curses. Seeing herself in the video, seeing what she had done from an outside perspective, her facade broke. She collapsed onto the table. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. She began to cry. They weren't the false tears of guilt I had seen before. They were real, heartbreaking sobs, full of accumulated pain and guilt. And amidst those sobs, she began to confess everything. She confessed that she had offered Lisa, her roommate. She said that Lisa, a girl full of life, had told her she wanted to leave college to pursue her dream of traveling the world. Isabella, under the manipulation of the cult, interpreted that dream as earthly weakness, a material attachment that needed to be purified. "She was too good, too pure," Isabella murmured, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want this world to soil her. I helped her transcend." She had been putting strong sedatives in her tea for weeks, making Lisa always feel tired and sleepy. On the last night, Isabella performed the ritual. She lit a special cult incense, one that contained a substance that caused mild asphyxiation. Then she locked the door and left, letting her best friend slowly sink into an eternal sleep. About David, her voice became unbearably painful. "I really love him," she sobbed. "I love him more than anything in the world." But that love, according to the White Hand's sick doctrine, was the greatest attachment, the last chain preventing her from achieving absolute purity. Offering David would be the noblest sacrifice, the supreme proof of her devotion, which would allow both of them to be sanctified. I felt a sharp pain in my chest hearing it. She had used love itself to justify murder. Detective Miller delved deeper into Isabella's past, trying to find the origin of her madness. It was then that Isabella revealed a dark secret that had tormented her since childhood, a wound that had never healed. She recounted that at age 8, playing with matches in the shed, she accidentally caused a fire that consumed the family home. Her parents did not survive. She came out alive, but from then on she carried a terrible guilt, convinced that she had killed her parents. Her aunt, who raised her, was a religious fanatic who, instead of comforting her, constantly repeated that it was divine punishment for being a sinful child. That guilt was the fertile ground where the White Hand sowed its doctrine. They found her when she was most vulnerable in college and convinced her that the only way to be forgiven, to redeem herself for that horror, was to offer. She had to sacrifice what she loved most. Lisa was the first, and David, the greatest love of her life, would be the last. While Isabella plunged into her tearful confession, the special team acted quickly, based on the data urgently extracted from Isabella's cell phone and laptop, including secret chats, coded appointments, and GPS locations of the places she visited at 1 a.m. They managed to identify the White Hand's main hideout. It was an old, abandoned farm on the outskirts of Phoenix, a perfect place to hide horrors. The operation was executed that same night. Special forces surrounded the place from all sides. They captured the entire cult leadership, the leaders known as the Guides, while they slept, unsuspecting that one of their most loyal members had revealed everything. But most importantly, they found hidden basements under the warehouse floor. There they rescued almost 20 captive victims. These were people at different stages of the purification process, their bodies weakened by hunger and drugs, and their minds completely disoriented, on the verge of losing consciousness. Detective Miller received a call at dawn. I saw her tense face soften. She looked at me, her voice somewhat tired but full of hope. "Eleanor, we found her." She was talking about Sarah, Marcus's daughter. Detective Miller took Marcus and me to a field hospital set up near the farm to care for the survivors. The air there was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and the weight of suffering. I saw Marcus walking back and forth, his fists clenched, his eyes scanning everything around him. Then, a nurse led us to a room. Inside, I saw a young woman huddled in bed, her gaze lost towards the window. She was so thin that only skin remained over her bones, her hair long and tangled. It was Sarah, no doubt. Marcus approached slowly, his father's heart hanging by a thread. He called softly, trembling. "Sarah, daughter." The young woman turned. At first her eyes were empty, not recognizing anyone. But then, as if a ray of light pierced the dense fog that had covered her mind for so long, she recognized her father's weathered, loving face. Her cracked lips moved. "Dad." Marcus ran to hug her. Father and daughter broke into tears. He cried for the years of vain searching, for the pain and remorse. Sarah cried for being freed from a living hell, for being able to return. They were not just tears of reunion, but also tears that washed away all those years of extreme suffering. I watched them from afar, not daring to interrupt that sacred moment. Tears also ran down my cheeks. I cried for them, and also for myself. At least one nightmare had truly ended. Months later, the trial against the White Hand organization took place and shook the entire country. The terrifying stories about the rituals, mysterious disappearances, and shattered families came to light before justice, leaving the public shocked. I, Marcus, and many other victims' families were present as witnesses. When I stood on the stand to testify and recount those nights of terror, I didn't look at the jury or the judge. My gaze was solely directed at Isabella. She was there in her prison uniform, her hair cut short, her face devoid of sweetness or fanaticism, just emptiness. Isabella, along with the leaders known as the Guides, was justly convicted of homicide, kidnapping, and leading a criminal organization. At the last hearing, as the guards led her away, Isabella turned to look at me. In her eyes there was no longer hatred, only belated regret and a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. I simply turned away in silence. Forgiving is God's business. I can only choose to forget. David did not attend any hearings. He said he wanted to close that chapter forever. Facing Isabella once more, even from the bench, was a torture he could not bear. My son spent a long time in hospital treatment. Doctors said he had been systematically poisoned with a herb that caused hallucinations and weakened the nervous system for several months. His body needed time to completely eliminate the toxin. But the most painful recovery was not physical, but mental. He had to attend therapy sessions to face the shock of being betrayed by the woman he loved and blindly trusted. How can anyone accept that the love they cultivated was actually a death sentence announced? As soon as he regained some clarity, the first thing David did was file for divorce. The process was quick, a clean cut to remove the malignant tumor from his life. Still, the nightmares continued. Sometimes at midnight I still hear him scream in his sleep. I run to his room and sit beside him until he calms down. The wounds of the body can heal, but the scars on the soul will remain forever. We knew we couldn't keep living in that house. Every corner, every object was imbued with painful memories. We sold the old house, leaving behind all the ghosts of the past. We moved to a quiet town by Lake Tahoe. The fresh air, the crystal-clear lake water, and the friendly neighbors slowly brought us relief. I decided to retire early from the hospital. I had had enough of living with death. With our lifelong savings, we opened a small bakery right on Main Street overlooking the lake. This was the dream my husband, Richard, and I used to cherish when we were young. The smell of butter, sugar, and baking flour every morning comforted our souls, an aroma of life, of sweetness that contrasted totally with the funerary incense that had haunted my family. David found himself again among the bread trays. He didn't go back to the stressful work of an engineer. Instead, he helped me in the bakery. He learned to make bread, to decorate cakes. His hands, which once only knew blueprints and numbers, were now skilled and patient with each layer of cream, with each sugar flour. His smile returned little by little, though it was no longer the same as before, innocent and luminous. It was the smile of someone who has survived the storm, a serene, deeper smile. One sunny Sunday afternoon, as we were getting everything ready to close the shop, Marcus brought Sarah to visit. Sarah was much better. She had gained weight, her hair was growing back, and her eyes were no longer empty. She told me she had resumed a ceramics course, that she was reconnecting with that artistic passion she had left behind. The four of us sat at the small table outside the bakery, looking towards the lake that glittered with the golden light of sunset. We drank tea, ate an apple pie, freshly baked by David, talked about the weather, a new recipe, some unimportant news that appeared in the newspaper. Nobody mentioned the white hand, nor Isabella, nor the nights of horror we left behind. But that silence was not uncomfortable. It was a silent understanding among those who have walked together to the depths of pain. There was no need to say anything because we all knew. The past was still there, like scars under clothes that sometimes ache when the weather changes. But it no longer defines our future. I saw David laughing with Sarah about some small anecdote. His laughter now was light, and the way he looked at Sarah had an empathetic tenderness. I knew then that our new dawn, a true one, had finally begun. I used to think that revenge was using your own hands to punish the wicked, a deserved justice to end suffering. But now I understand that true revenge is sometimes the hard path of seeking justice in the darkness, when a fragile mother dares to confront an entire sick organization to save her child. In this story of revenge I told you over the last hour, I didn't kill anyone. I didn't claim blood with blood, but I forced the truth to come to light, for the guilty to face the consequences, and I learned that blind faith can kill, but love with open eyes can save a life. If someone out there is experiencing things that the heart knows are wrong, please don't stay silent. Speak up. Act. Because sometimes a revenge story begins precisely at the moment we dare to look truth in the face and don't look away. The names and places in this story have been modified to protect the identity of those involved. We tell it not to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are enduring in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you stay silent to avoid conflict, or would you face everything to reclaim your own voice? I want to know your opinion on this story of stories that hurt, or any suggestions you have to help us improve our content. May God always bless you, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Right now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.